and there's nobody to convince anything of. If anybody wants to ask us something or ask you something, you try to explain your best, but yeah, convincing or trying to persuade or being in agreement, or I don't know, somehow from here it's like you just can let everything go, and it just works. So it just all works. Somehow it all works.
Well, that's been probably the major stumbling block here, because of my, at least the body-mind organism as a warrior by nature, and there's a tendency, if you see something, you want somebody else to see it, but it really is at the conceptual level, and I used to call it dueling Bibles. I knew a New Age kind of preacher who was what I would call a recovering Catholic. He had an issue with the church, so his whole life sort of revolved around proving the church wrong. And he had a good teaching, but he never really got beyond that battle, childhood battle with the church. But I saw him one day where some people came in. Somebody would hear the teaching, and it was an enlightened teaching. They would go back to the church, and then the church would send out an auditor to go ahead and see what he was actually saying. And at the end of the meetings, they would try to challenge him with the Bible. Well, this man was a master in terms of understanding the Bible. There was nobody in the world that I'd ever met that knew it that well, because he sort of, if you know the subjective understanding, you can see the Bible, any spiritual teaching, well, everything basically has surface. There's the surface level, or the level of the letter, and then there's the spirit. And Jesus challenged the Pharisees. You seek the scriptures daily, but you seek in the letters, not the spirit. The letters kill, the spirit giveth light, basically. Well, Bill would go at him with the dueling Bibles, and it wasn't much of a duel, because it wasn't 2 minutes later they were heading for the exits. But it really becomes counterproductive, because if you use the Deshan mountain was neat for me, because I had a metaphor of life is a mountain, and one view, once you're on the mountainside, doesn't contain all views. They're all relative. The higher views basically have a broader perspective and embrace, yet do not deny the lower views. And the only one that is totally integrative is the one from the top of the mountain, basically. So you're really arguing a relative reality, and what a person sees and thinks is true as far as from his perspective, and to argue with that is, number one, to do yourself disservice, because as Bill says, if you judge him, you're really judging yourself, because it is all one thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And that analogy, or that vision of the Deshan mountain, I think Bill also, I know, he writes about the glass pyramid, I believe. And that to me is, wow, what a great way to picture in your mind how the truth is all inclusive. So it includes every aspect at the bottom of the pyramid. Every corner, he describes every corner filled with, like this religion, and the Catholics, the Muslims, the Protestants, the governments, the socialism, the communisms, the democracies, all this stuff going on at the bottom of the pyramid. Everybody's billions of ideas and concepts and the relative all down there. And then as you climb to the top of this glass pyramid, and from the very top you look down at all these four corners, and you see how quite naturally everybody looking up sees a little bit of a different perspective on, where the stars are and where the sky is, and everybody's perspective is totally different. But from the top, you look down and you see that they are all included within this one. The other one that is just literally obvious is when you take a hike up we have a mountain in our town that if you go up this little road, you go up real high up the little hike. It's a lovely little hike, and then you get to this little point on the top of this mountain, and you look down over the valley, and you see the whole town below. And then when you look down, you can see below little paths going up to the top. I mean, there's one main road, but you can see that people have tracked these other little tracks through the trees and through the bushes, and there's many little tracks coming up to the same point. So really, in the light of truth, you see that every path, every little way that somebody finds his way up to the top of the mountain was his way up there, and they all end up at the same place.
Which reminds me of, my bailout story, and it's in the book, and I've posted it. I think it's on the internet. It's been there for about 20 years or so. But with the bailout, I had the experience during the emergency of time standing still. And you know me, I analyze less with each passing day, but I tend to analyze things half to death to see. It's like a guy thing, I guess, where you like gadgets and you want to know what makes it work, so you take it apart and that kind of stuff. But with the time standing still, and I only had it one other time to that degree. It wasn't slow. It started as slow motion, but in the shock, it's sort of like an extreme emergency is a wonderful meditative device because your mind becomes one-pointed and you're sort of at a still point. And the moment, it's all a function of mental movement where the metaphor I use is you put one hand over one eye, and then the other eye you sort of narrow the vision, and then the field of awareness is still there that's looking out, but it's now looking out of a little knothole, and it has to move it around to see a particular snapshot, and then it's got all these little bits and pieces it's made, and then it has to put Humpty back together again. But if you open the aperture of the knothole, essentially, if it's like moving back or going up the mountain. In my case, it's sort of like in any given moment, you're looking out and you're looking in. So that creates sort of a relativity and a movement between the looking out and the looking in. And you're taking a little bit of information, and the normal processing rate might be 5 looks in 10 seconds. But in this particular case, you see what you would have seen in 10 seconds in one big picture, one big look. So it's like you step back. As you go up the mountain, your focal length gets longer, your breadth of vision gets longer, and you're able to see at one time a bigger bite of the whole. Well, if you hit dead center, if you use a global reference, you get stereoscopic awareness or nonlinear awareness, where your central sense of self is a sense of presence that is able to see the entire globe all at one time. And we're sort of back to that idea of a holographic universe, or the dewdrop that reflects the whole web. Well, that's one idea. The other experience, I had total life recall, but again, it's like you step back mentally out of your normal focal length or frame of reference, and I think we're identified with a particular focal length. The old metaphor I used to do for a guy anyway, you're looking through this telescope and you see a beautiful, beautiful veiled woman, but she's got 1,000 veils on her, and as you watch, the veils start coming off, and there's more and closer frame of reference, and the curves get better and better from a guy's standpoint, and then at some point you fall in love with that particular expression of divine beauty expressed as a female, and then you want to hold it right there. You want to keep it, and you take a photograph of it, and you won't let it keep unveiling. You sort of start worshiping a particular image. You identify with a particular focal length. Well, human mind and human consciousness is a particular mental focal length. If we're identified with it, then that knothole stays stuck, and we have it has all sorts of mechanisms to make sure whenever it's starting to expand, it finds a way to get back and hold that contraction. But ultimately, experience I had that at that moment was my entire life was one big picture seen all at one time, and that I could sort of pick and choose whatever was germane or relevant to that particular moment.
Yeah, that also, your description of that reminds me of how Bill used the word omnijective, like rather than objective or subjective, it is duality and non-duality. It is omnijective. It is the world that we live in is both. It's always both. And to be at that points at once. There's not a division, and yet it knows what is and what is not, and yet they are both here. There isn't anything eliminated or gotten rid of this all-inclusive totality, but it is very, it can see, yes, it sees what is and what isn't. It sees the multitudes at the bottom. It sees the pure, infinite all that includes it all. And it sees both of those all at the same time, and it doesn't try to eliminate anything. And when you get to this place, this is the child. This is what Bill is always talking about in that book, is about this child that can see from that whole the omnipresence. And yes, you see them both at once. It reminded me a bit of, speaking of little analogies of how to see it, is I kind of saw it as, it was like looking through binoculars. You know, you got the two lenses, and let's say one's dualism and one's non-duality, or one's from the top of the mountain and one's from the bottom. And somehow you're looking through these two binoculars and you keep twisting the little thing in the middle until they come into focus into one. And that oneness makes what you're looking at very, very clear. And so for me, that was another little analogy, is that they do both come together so that you become. You perceive clearly. It's a focus that comes into a totality that then you can see everything. You can see it all in detail. And you can see in detail. That's the other extraordinary thing, is rather than everything becoming some infinite vast void of nothingness, which I hear a lot of, sort of the non-duality people speak about, we don't become a big void of nothing. Actually, everything gets more and more distinct. It's extraordinary. Colors, light, textures, the clarity of the world of everything we see and everything we understand. I mean, both. What we see, what we don't see, what we understand, what's in our heart, everything becomes more distinct, much clearer, much more, that every single thing has an amazing, intricate beauty that is so precise and perfect, and it's extraordinary. Life becomes just, my vocabulary, I don't have the words for it, but distinct is the only thing I can think of. Yeah.
I don't want to get into the warfare side of this thing, but the experience I had for being in Vietnam for a year is because of the threat in the environment, where you're automatically much more present-minded because it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
Whereas in our normal life, we don't have to be that concerned about what's going on around us. Well, in my experience in that environment was by the contrast and the threat, it evoked an awareness and a presence that saw things with much greater clarity. The colors were brighter. Life felt more precious, and you were more happy in the moment. You weren't worried about the next moment because you really had to be. It forced you to be present. It's a heck of a meditation device, but I don't recommend it.
That is interesting. Yes, well, it's very much exactly like that for me. This is the